Greetings, brothers and sisters. Welcome to the weekly Mormon News Roundup. I'm your humble host, D-Base. That's talent on loan from Kolob. Every week, my crew and I, we ruminate on this great and spacious beehive. So thanks so much for joining us to discuss the contemporary events in Mormonism. It's May 19th, 2024. Guys, I'm still on a business trip and I'm out of touch right now, but I'm releasing a long-lost episode. I know it's a rerun, but it is a great interview. You know, I've done so many interviews on the Mormon News Roundup. I've had dozens of folks on as co-hosts, and I haven't done that many times where I've appeared on other person's podcasts. And that's why I'm releasing this episode that is called the Art of Floundering Podcast with Will Dick. It's a fascinating insight into your humble host D-Base and the Mormon News Roundup. I'll be back again next week with live content, but you're not going to want to miss this interview. Thanks so much for joining me. And remember, no unhallowed hand can stop this podcast from progressing.
Ladies and gentlemen, kicking off the first stop on his world tour, our new president and prophet, Russell M. Nelson! You say you want some revelation, well, here you go. It's gonna blow your freaking mind.
This is Will Dick with the Art of Floundering Podcast. Today's date is the 3rd of November, 2022. I have a special guest, D-Vase, from Mormon Movie Reviews, and this is Mormon movies are something that I'm very into. D-Vase, welcome. Thank you for being on the podcast. Welcome. I wanted, we talked yesterday about your site. Would you describe it? What your site is? I'll do a poor job, but the name of the site's on YouTube is Mormon Movie Reviews. Could you describe what it's about for people listening, please?
I like to look at official church videos of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, or unofficial or affiliated videos of the church, and either review them in real time, meaning I'm doing basically a one-man watch party. I will watch the movie and give my comments to it. Or if they're exceptionally long, sometimes I'll just review portions of them. And, just give my thoughts, give my reviews, give my reflections.
Right. And we were talking yesterday because I was surprised. There's a wide variety of Mormon LDS films that are in there, from what people would consider faith promoting to like Orgasmo you reviewed, and Book of Mormon, and I thought that was interesting. What has drawn you to Mormon movies? We talked about, I know what draws me, but can you articulate what draws you to these movies, the interest?
Yeah, that's a really good question. First of all, I just grew up with this genre of movies. I remember, when I was a kid, we weren't even really allowed to watch TV, but we were allowed to watch a lot of the Living Scriptures or Mormon, church-produced videos or family home evening supplements. And I just grew up with all of these movies, and they're just a special place in my heart for all of these films. And so I just love going back and just opening up it's like a time portal back to my childhood for so many of these films. And that's why a lot of the Mormon movie reviews are a little bit older. I'm not technically, although I am reviewing some of the films that have come out recently, like Keep Sweet, Pray and Obey, Under the Banner of Heaven, the Manti Te'o Untold Story. Yes, I'm doing some contemporary stuff, but a lot of my heart is in older movies.
The other interesting thing, because I had a misconception, I am also a fan of these movies, and I think yesterday when you touched on the going back to a different time, I think maybe for me, I think that really hit home, especially now. I find myself, I wouldn't call myself active, but I do go to these movies when there are times of challenges. I've been watching a lot of them lately. What are some of the signature LDS films that you think are significant for whatever reason, artistically, or they really capture an experience accurately? What would you say are some of the most signature LDS films?
In my mind, there's really a couple of different types of films. So the most you have feature-length films, which are produced by the church, which are somewhat rare. So I would say, like, Meet the Mormons 2014. That's a centerpiece. Legacy, of One Fold and One Shepherd, The Man's Search for Happiness, The First Vision, the one that was shot in 1976 with Stuart Peterson. These are the seminal and bedrock foundational church films. But then there's also non-church produced films, such as God's Army. That's not a church-produced film. Obviously, that was intending to try to be somewhat mainstream. It had a limited release, but still. You have The Other Side of Heaven. So you have these films that are produced by some mid-level studios that are intended for a Mormon audience.
Right. Like you did Under the Banner of Heaven. and there are some with a Mormon or an LDS theme, so to speak. I've read about the film and Richard Dutcher, who did God's Army, and you touched on that. Still holding up to the test of the time accurately. I was never on a mission, but I believe you were. Is that correct?
Yeah, sure. I'm a returned missionary. Yeah, as a matter of fact, I just watched Brigham City, Richard Dutcher's 2001 movie just today. I watched the whole movie today. I'm going back and reviewing all of those old Richard Dutcher films. Yeah, I'm a returned missionary for sure.
Brigham City is I think that's another great film. But, Richard Dutcher, he's actually in a couple of history books about Mormonism. He played a key role, I guess, in what they call the Renaissance, or was it Mormon cinema? There seemed to be a buildup right around the time of God's Army and the Single Wars. Are you familiar with the time I was talking about, when it seemed like after Dutcher there was going to be a whole genre called Mormon cinema?
His nickname is the Godfather of Mormon cinema, and it really started with God's Army in 2000, which was very successful. He followed that up in 2001 with Brigham City, which was also successful. And then you had a lot of spin-offs, as you just mentioned, like the Singles Ward in 2003, or the RM, which I also just reviewed, or Charlie, which was made, from Jack Whalen's book. All those were in the 2002-2003 time frame. Baptists at Our Barbecue. All those films are part of that wave, the first wave of Mormon cinema, which was trying to make feature-length films which would appeal to a mostly LDS audience.
And I remember every single one of those titles, and I think there was a basketball one in there too, Church League, I think.
Church ball.
Yeah, Church ball. But Charlie, I didn't even think of that movie when we were talking yesterday. Did that ever have crossover appeal? Because that seemed like it would.
Well, if you look at the Rotten Tomatoes for Charlie, it's 20% on. It's funny because I actually just reviewed Charlie just a short time ago. The Rotten Tomatoes on it is 20%, but the audience score is like 85%. And when you see that kind of a divide in the Rotten Tomatoes, it's telling you that it has a narrow appeal. Like Meet the Mormons in 2014 had a 70-point Rotten Tomatoes spread. When you have that kind of a spread, it means that the only people who like this movie are typically faithful Latter-day Saints, and that it did not achieve mass appeal.
A resurgence or a part two, a sequel to that Mormon cinema revival. Do you see that as a possibility, or is that unrealistic expectation?
I yearn in my heart that we'd be able to go back to really the golden age, which is right around that time of 2000. But the problem is you had films like take The Other Side of Heaven, for instance, depicts John Groberg's mission to Tonga in, what was that, like the late 1950s.
Right.
That was picked up Disney. That was a Disney film produced by Disney, starring Anne Hathaway right before she did The Princess Diaries and before she really went global. And it had, a Hollywood budget. We're talking about a budget of, I think it was $7 million, which is actually the highest budget for any Mormon film of all time, is The Other Side of Heaven. It didn't even recoup its money. It lost millions. And remember, The Other Side of Heaven, he never says the word Mormon in that film.
Right.
It's implied that he's Mormon, but it was trying to just be a Christian. They were trying to make it have a wider appeal by not having the Mormon elements so front and center. So they try to just basically Christianize it. And when that film falls flat on its face, being distributed on, like 1,500 theaters, and it only made $3 million. Think about Avatar. Think about Avengers Endgame. Those are $3 billion, not $3 million. When a studio is looking at what has been done in Mormon cinema in the past, and they've seen like Orgasmo, you mentioned Orgasmo, that movie, it lost money. When you see a film time and time again, even Richard Dutcher's, his sequel to God's Army, lost money. Even the great Richard Dutcher, it's very hard to make any money in Mormon cinema. And that's why it's going to be very, very hard for a revival to take place, because it does not have a mass appeal. And as the percentage of members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints goes down over time in comparison to the U.S. population and the world population, the challenge is becoming more severe, not less.
Those are fantastic points, and I agree with all of them, unfortunately, because like you, I want to see it happen, and I have a tendency to do confirmation bias on this topic, you know what I mean? I get everything you're saying. Here's my hope, and I'm a huge movies fan, just movies as an artistic expression, but I think movies are going to go the way of music. In other words, the big studio days, just like the big music studio days, are coming to an end. A lot of movies per se, I see people doing just like they're doing their own music in their home studio. I mean, the things that I can do with animation here, and perhaps maybe somebody with something to say, a kid, some college kids will do an independent movie. That's probably the best we can hope for, given what you said. But, you're right. It seems like a bygone era. Is there anything, for people like us, what fills the void? Just keep going back and watching the same ones over and over again?
That's the thing, Will, is that if you go to on the Hard to Find Mormon movie channel, there's 800 movies on the Hard to Find Mormon channel. And there's plenty of other movies that are not even on that channel. There's probably in the neighborhood of 1,500 Mormon-related movies that have ever been made. I'm just spitballing here, but that's probably a number that is probably somewhere in the ballpark. Will, how many of those 1,500 movies have you actually watched?
A good point.
I bet you haven't even watched 200 of them. I certainly haven't watched 1,500 of them. So there's still plenty of movies out there that are diamonds in the rough, that are gems. And for me, it's kind of the joy in the journey. I want to find those great movies. I want to, for instance, in my channel, I just reviewed Children of Promise, which is a truly crazy film strip that was released back in 1980 that included audio that went along with that. It is an insane ride to watch Children of Promise. And for me, I'm always just hunting out there for where is the next gem? Where is the next movie? Because there's a lot of just, obviously the church produce a lot of just faith promoting, do your home teaching, pay your tithe, nothing to see here. There's nothing too interesting about them, but there's gems out there to be found, and I want to find them all.
A very good point, because the count on your site, 51 movies so far, is that accurate that you reviewed?
Yeah, I've done 51 movies. There's maybe 1,500 Mormon-related movies, but I don't think all of them are actually really worth reviewing. I think that probably around 300 movies that are probably worth reviewing. There's some movies out there that I don't have very much to offer as far as commentary is concerned. I don't think that I can really do much for a viewer. I don't think I'm going to be generating any very good content. And so I'm not going to review those. I'm going to concentrate on the movies that I think that I'll have something to say and something to offer and that people hopefully would be interested in.
The other thing on that you've done that I found fascinating is you've kind of broke down all the finances. Besides God's Army, has there been a profitable Mormon movie?
Yeah, there have been profitable movies. Work on the Glory had a budget of $3.3 million and it grossed 7.5. So, hey, good call. Yes,
wow.
Work on the Glory, most profitable Mormon movie probably that's ever been made. Now, we don't know what the budget, by the way, of Meet the Mormons 2014 was. So it could be Meet the Mormons 2014 because they probably didn't pay the actors. That was the officially produced church film. And that grossed somewhere in the neighborhood of 6-7 million. So it is one of those two is certainly on top if we don't include the Book of Mormon musical.
And the Book of Mormon musical, correct me if I'm wrong, all the quote profit combined doesn't even come close to what the Book of Mormon musical has made. Is that an accurate statement?
Right. If you combine every single Mormon movie that has ever been made and the gross earnings, and you combine them together, then the Book of Mormon musical has grossed $600 million. And all of the Mormon movies together don't equal that. Unless, Will, there is one caveat to that. And that is my 25th Mormon movie review is the Mormon Temple Endowment film. Now, technically, if you think about it, the Mormon Temple Endowment film, it requires 10% of your income to be able to watch that movie. If you actually think about it, Will, that movie stands truly alone on top of every box office. It crushes Avengers Endgame. It crushes Titanic.
There's
because if
nobody.
you think about all the millions of people who have paid 10% to be able to watch that movie stands alone and will never be dethroned as the all-time earner.
That is a very astute point. I would say it's earned more than the GDP of some countries. Now, when you say temple, you're talking. Which one are you talking? Is this a new one that I've been out of the loop?
I'll encourage you go back to my episode 25 where I did a review of the Mormon Temple Endowment movie. There's been 7 Mormon and Temple Endowment movies,
right?
In some way, shape, or form. The last one was released in 2014, but then it was updated in 2019. Due to various factors, such as the fact that the producer, Sterling Van Wagner, was ended up guilty to child sex abuse. That was probably one reason that it was changed around, although that is a speculation.
That's what I was going to talk to you about, because I believe that was one thing, and there's all kinds of palace intrigue with that movie. I was just curious what version. Are you reviewing the one that got pulled version, the 2019 version?
It depends on how you divide it up. For instance, there's a 1988 version and a 1990 version. Those versions have the exact same dialogue. I count those as one version, although I can certainly see why some people would count that as two different versions because they had two different sets of actors. I personally count that as one. The original version also that was shot, the very first Mormon endowment movie that was shot in English back in 1953. Well, it was reshot again the following year in different languages. Do you count that as a different version because it has a different cast? I personally don't. So like I said, it depends on how you divide it.
I find what's fascinating is all the research you do. Walk me through just, and people listening, how much research just goes into just a typical episode.
It just really depends on what type of a film it is that we're talking about. Because if you're reviewing the singles ward, it doesn't take necessarily that much research to do a singles ward. You certainly need to know your stuff. And I would say that a singles ward review could be done in around 5 to 10 hours. But like the most difficult review that I've done would be for Legacy, for instance, 1993, that was shown in the Visitor Center in Temple Square and in some other visitor center. That review took me between 20 and 30 hours to complete. And it's one of my longest reviews because it is full of church history. They're going to Quincy. They're going to Clay County. There's the Hunts Mill Massacre. They're at Independence, Missouri. They're all over the place. I really need to understand what's happening in the film. And so I really needed to review every portion of that church history, which took me about 30 hours. That was a 2-week process for me to crank out that review. So it really just depends. I reviewed recently The Bridge, which is a short. It's only about 10 minutes long. There's no real research that necessarily needs to be done too much in a short that's only 10 minutes long.
Has there ever been a movie that maybe the church either backed, supported, and then later is kind of had to back away from just because of for whatever reason? I'm not aware of one. I'm not aware of any movies out there, but are you aware of any movies that the church might have been a part of and but backed away from?
Yeah, take for instance Johnny Lingo, for instance.
Okay.
1969. So that movie, way up until just a couple of years ago, it was tagged as faith promoting, divine worth, marriage. It was made by Brigham Young University, by the BYU Motion Picture Studio, which is basically the church's arm at the time of making films. And now on YouTube, if you put Johnny Lingo up on YouTube, the church will come out and copyright strike it. So yes, the church made that video and they took it down. If you think about another review that I did, which was called Journey to Become, which was put out by the video department of the LDS Philanthropies Department, that video was also taken down by the church and has been copyright striked and is only available on the Wayback Machine on Internet Archive. So yeah, there's been plenty of films that the church has put out that they've fought better of later, and that they don't promote them or will actively try to copyright strike people from taking them down because they had not aged well.
In everybody's defense, there are things I did 30 years ago that just don't age well. So, I could understand that. Where do you think you're a young person, you're interested in filmmaking, and you go to BYU, or you want to be a filmmaker, but you want to make different kind of films? Do you think that path exists for faith promoting films, or is it, like we talked about it yesterday, is it just a phenomenon happening with LDS films, or do you see this with other faith films that they're really just not holding up well?
I don't know. If you think about like the Chosen series, that's extremely popular. That's really kind of a global series. Honestly, Will, I'm really probably the wrong person to ask that. I'm supposed to be the Mormon Movie Review critic, but I have no film credentials. I didn't go to film school. I didn't go to film critique school. I really am not qualified to be doing what I'm doing. But the problem is that the people who are qualified, they're not going to do what in my opinion really needs to be done. All I can say is that Mormon cinema has time and time again showed, whether it's The Best 2 Years, whether it's Saints and Soldiers, they made a trilogy of Saints and Soldiers, or whether it's The Work and the Glory, you're going to have a very narrow appeal. And you're only going to be able to appeal to the Jello Belt. And as the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, as the fervency of its members, as the percentage of members with regards to the total movie-going population decreases, it is going to be increasingly an uphill battle for LDS filmmakers to try to make faith-promoting films that are not produced by the church that are going to turn a profit.
I agree with you. We were talking about Richard Dutcher. There was one time he was conducting a clinic for people that wanted to be independent filmmakers into space, and he taught them how to finance it. But you don't see him doing that anymore. In fact, it's been a long time since Dutcher's made a movie. As we're winding things down, we've got Mormon Movie Reviews, which is on YouTube. Talk about, your plans for that and some of the other things you're doing. Just, plug whatever it is you want to plug, basically.
Well, I really appreciate that. First of all, for Mormon Movie Reviews, my goal is to review every single Mormon film and Mormon-related film that has ever been done that is worth reviewing. And I think that number is somewhere around 300. Afterwards, I will only respond to, the movies that are the documentaries and things that are brought up year upon year, which obviously there's several that are brought up every year. Number two, I run a podcast that's called the Mormon News Roundup, where we kind of take a humorous look at the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and other Mormon-related entities every week and see what's going on in the world of Mormonism. So I've been doing that podcast now. I guess we've got about 40 episodes of that podcast under our belt. So I guess those are the projects that I'm working on.
Weren't you telling me you were going to have somebody on this weekend on that podcast?
Matter of fact, we're going to have a Radio Free Mormon who is basically the OG of Mormon podcasting. His podcast is probably the most listened to Mormon podcast outside of the church's official podcast. And he's going to be on this Sunday.
That is huge. And what I'll say about your site is that you're not, with these movies, depending on where people fall, and I understand there's always a reluctance to bring up certain things, but you review the movies and you talk about all the subjects, good, bad, or indifferent. And I think what you're doing is really very important. And I just thank you for doing it. I love these movies, and I love that you're taking them seriously, that you're doing the research, and you're not shying away from some of the peculiarities in some of these.
I did a review of the church's film, which is called Very Much Alive. In my opinion, it is the only really fit church film that really touches on abortion. It's a very difficult film, was a very difficult film for me to review, A, because I'm a male, mm-hmm. Two, I don't have health experience. I really don't have much experience in abortion, but it was a huge anti-abortion film. And I reviewed that. It was a huge challenge for me. Am I the right person to make that review? I'm probably not. But the people who are supposed to be doing that review, they're not doing it. So I guess somebody's got to do it. And that somebody, I guess, is going to be me.
I'm very, very happy that you're doing it. And I want to highly encourage anybody that listens to this podcast to please check out Mormon Movie Review, Mormon News Roundup. I heard you mention you have a music background.
I am a former musician myself. As a matter of fact, I was a member for many years of the it used to be called the Mormon Tabernacle Choir, the orchestra at Temple Square. It's been renamed. So, yeah, I love music. I'm a big musician, and I guess that was just kind of a part of my previous life. I don't do much with music anymore. I've kind of transitioned over to doing news and movie criticism, mm-hmm. and I'm happy doing what I'm doing.
Yeah, I noticed the grand piano in the background on your stream, so that's just not for decoration. That really gets played and everything.
That's just a fake background.
Oh, okay. Okay. Well, it looks real, man. You fooled me. Well, look, I really appreciate having you on. I want to have you on multiple times, talk about, history, whatever you want to, but thank you so much for coming on. D. Vase with Mormon Movie Reviews. Please go check this site out, because if you're not familiar with Mormonism, it's not what you think. It's not a recruiting tool. Thank you once again for coming on the Art of Floundering podcast. From Parts Unknown, Colorado, this is Will Dick. I want to wish everybody peace and love. Peace and love, and thank you very much.
When it comes to nicknames of the church, such as LDS Church, the Mormon Church, to remove the Lord's name from the Lord's church is a major victory for Satan.
Satan.